I didn't realize my life didn't belong to me until my mother-in-law told me which room I was allowed to cry in. If you had seen us that morning, you would have thought I was one of the lucky ones. The kind of woman people envy quietly. The kind of life people screenshot on social media and send to their friends with captions like, "This is the goal." The kitchen alone looked like it belonged in a luxury catalog. White marble counters imported from Italy. Custom cabinets that closed without a sound. A sub-zero fridge that always seemed full, even when I hadn't gone grocery shopping. Outside, a black Tesla Model X sat perfectly aligned in the driveway, right beside Daniel's silver BMW. Everything looked intentional, curated, effortless. And me? I stood barefoot on the polished floor, wearing a silk robe I didn't remember choosing, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug that read, "Home is where the heart is." I remember staring at that sentence longer than usual, because something about it felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, just slightly off, like a word spelled correctly, but used in the wrong sentence. Funny thing is, nothing in that house was actually mine. My husband, Daniel, liked to say, "Everything we have is because of my mother." He always said it casually, almost charming, like it was a story about gratitude. But over time, it started to sound less like appreciation and more like a warning. I didn't understand yet. Catherine Mercer, my mother-in-law, if wealth could take human form, it would look exactly like her. She was the kind of woman who never raised her voice, because she never had to. People adjusted around her automatically. Conversations softened. Rooms rearranged themselves. Decisions. She wore neutral tones, like they were a uniform. Cream, beige, ivory. Always precise. Always intentional. And always, with a Hermes bag resting on her arm, like it was part of her anatomy. The first time I noticed something was wrong, wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No confrontation. No betrayal you could point at. It was a delivery. A Louis Vuitton box, placed carefully at our front door. The driver knocked once, looked at his clipboard, then said, "Delivery for Mrs. Mercer." Not me. Here. For a second, I almost corrected him, almost said, "That's not my name." But I didn't, because at that point, I still believed this was my house. I signed for it, carried it inside, placed it gently on the entry table, and then I waited. Not consciously, but instinctively, because something inside me already knew this wasn't for me. Catherine arrived later that afternoon. Of course she did. She never announced her visits. Never needed to. She moved through the house, like she had built it herself, like the walls responded to her presence. She walked in wearing Gucci loafers, looked at the orange box, and smiled. Not surprised. Not curious. Satisfied. "Oh, good," she said softly. It arrived. I laughed. Light. Polite. "Daniel already buying early birthday gifts?" I asked. She turned to me, and in that tiny pause, something shifted. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Ownership. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, placing a hand gently on my arm. The kind of touch that feels kind, until you realize it isn't. "This isn't for you." That should have been the moment. The moment everything became clear. But control like Catherine's doesn't reveal itself all at once. It unfolds, layer by layer, until one day, you realize you've been standing inside it the entire time. That night, I asked Daniel. We were in our bedroom, if you could call it that. The walk-in closet alone was larger than my first apartment. His suites, perfectly spaced, perfectly tailored. Today, mine, arranged, organized, maintained, but not chosen. "Why does everything come in your mother's name?" I asked. He didn't look up. "It's just easier that way." Easier. That word stayed in the air, longer than it should have. "The house?" I pressed. "Her name. The cars? Her company. The accounts? Family structure." Family structure. I turned toward him slowly. "And me?" That's when he finally looked at me. Smiled. The same controlled, practiced smile he used at dinners. Meetings. Events. You're my wife, he said. Not partner. Not owner. Not equal. And suddenly, everything in that room felt staged. The lighting, the furniture, the quiet luxury, like I had been placed there to complete a picture, not live inside it. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Property tax letters, always addressed to Catherine. Insurance documents, never including my name. The way Daniel said, "Our home," in public, but my mother's property, in private. And the worst part? I had helped build this life. Back when Daniel had nothing. I worked 2 jobs, paid rent, bought groceries. I remember buying him his first real suit, from Brooks Brothers, so he could walk into interviews, looking like he belonged. He used to tell me, "When I make it, everything will be ours." And I believed him, not because he convinced me, but because I wanted to believe we were building something together. He did make it, just not with me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It always does. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just clarity. I was hosting lunch. Catherine's friends, women who wore quiet luxury, like a second language, Chanel jackets, diamond bracelets that didn't need attention. I prepared everything. Table set, wine chilled, food perfect, everything correct. Catherine walked in, looked around, adjusted one flower arrangement by less than an inch, and said, "We need to talk about boundaries." I smiled. "What kind of boundaries?" I asked. She didn't sit. She never sat. When she wanted control, "This is still my house," she said. "And there are certain standards." Standards. She gestured toward the dining room. "The way you hosto," she continued. "It's a bit casual." Casual. That word landed like something disguised as polite. "I thought it was fine," I said carefully. She smiled. That same controlled smile. "You thought," she said softly. And that was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But absolute. I wasn't living in my home. I was performing in hers. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen. The sub-zero fridge humming behind me. The polished counters reflecting a life that suddenly didn't feel real anymore. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. If nothing here belongs to me, then what happens if I leave? I didn't know it yet, but that question was the first crack, because what Catherine Mercer didn't understand was, control only works when the other person is afraid to lose everything. And I was about to realize something dangerous. I had nothing, which meant I had nothing left to be afraid of. The first time I asked to see our bank accounts, my husband didn't say no. He smiled and made me question why I was asking. That's the thing about control. It doesn't block you. It redirects you until you forget what you were looking for. 2 days after Catherine told me, I needed to understand boundaries. I sat across from Daniel at breakfast. Same kitchen, same light, same illusion of stability. But something inside me was no longer playing along. "I want to go over our finances," I said. Simple sentence. Normal request. The kind of thing a wife should be able to ask, without preparing for it. Daniel didn't react right away. He took a sip of coffee, set the cup down slowly, and then looked at me. Not confused. Measured. "Why?" he asked. That word again. Why? Not. Of course. Not. "What do you want to know?" "Just. Why?" I held his gaze. "Because I've never seen anything," I said. He smiled. Polished. The same smile he used when he needed to calm a room. "Emily," he said gently, "you've never needed to." There it was. The shift. He didn't deny me. He minimized the need. "I'm your wife," I said. "I should understand what we have." He leaned back slightly. Relaxed posture. Controlled tone. "And you do," he said. A pause. "We have a house. We have security. We have a life most people would kill for." He replaced the question with a better story. "I'm not asking what it looks like," I said. "I'm asking what it is." For a second, just a second, his expression tightened. Then, he laughed. Not loudly, just enough to make it seem harmless. You're overthinking again, he said. Overthinking. That word landed heavier than anything else. Because it didn't challenge my question. It challenged my perception. I'm asking for access, I said. Accounts? Statements. Ownership. He stood up, walked around the island slowly, placed his hand on my shoulder. Not forceful. Not aggressive. Just positioning. Emily, he said quietly. Do you trust me? That question. It sounds like love, but it's not. It's leverage. Yes, I said. Then why are you acting like this? He asked. There it was. The full shift. Not, why do you need this? But, why are you behaving wrong? I pulled slightly away from his hand. I'm not acting like anything, I said. I'm asking a normal question. He exhaled. Controlled frustration. You're letting my mother get into your head, he said. Blame redirected. Efficient. This has nothing to do with her, I replied. He looked at me. Really looked this time. Everything in this house has something to do with her. And just like that, he told the truth. That conversation didn't end in a fight. It ended in silence. Which is worse. Because silence doesn't resolve anything. It just pushes it deeper. That afternoon, I did something Daniel never expected. I didn't argue. I didn't confront. I moved. I went to the bank. Same place we had used for years. Same glass doors. Same polite smiles. Same illusion. The teller recognized me instantly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Mercer. That name felt strange now. Not wrong. Just unearned. I'd like to review all accounts under my name, I said. She typed, paused, typed again, then looked up. And in that moment, I already knew. I'm sorry, she said carefully. There are no active accounts under your name. The words didn't register immediately. No, I said slowly. That's not possible. She turned the screen slightly. Professional. Neutral. There is one joint household account, she explained. But primary authorization belongs to Mr. Fording. R. Mercer. Primary. And the others? I asked. She hesitated. Just enough. Those accounts are under a separate entity, she said. I don't have permission to access them for you. Entity. Permission. I nodded. Smiled. Thanked her. Walked out. And only when I reached the parking lot did it hit. I didn't just lack control. I lacked existence. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. Not because I was afraid. Because something had changed. Before, I was asking questions. Now I was collecting answers. When he got home, he was different. Too calm. How was your day? He asked. Fine, I said. He studied me. Just a second longer than usual. You went somewhere, he said. Not a question? I smiled. Just errands. He nodded slowly. And in that moment, I understood something critical. He wasn't relaxed. He was monitoring. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into his office. The one room in the house that always felt off limits. Not locked. Never locked. Because real control doesn't need locks. It needs confidence that no one will look. His desk was clean. Too clean. But I had lived with him long enough to know where control hides. Second drawer. Back corner. Leather folder. Inside. Order. Structure. And truth. Tax returns. Entity names. Transfer records. And everywhere. One name. Catherine Mercer. The house. Her name. The cars. Her company. The accounts. Her structure. And Daniel. Everywhere. But nowhere. Control without ownership. Power without exposure. It was brilliant. And cold. Then, I found something else. A second folder. Hidden behind the first. Older. Heavier. I opened it slowly. Inside. Legal documents. Trust structures. Control clauses. And one line, typed cleanly. Precisi. Emily does not require visibility. I stared at it. Longer than I should have. Not shocked. Not even hurt. Just clear. Because now, this wasn't confusion. It was design. I put everything back. Exactly. Closed the drawer. Turned off the light. Walked out. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt focused. Because Daniel thought he was controlling me by limiting what I could see. What he didn't understand was he had just shown me exactly where to look. And Catherine? She thought control came from ownership. She was wrong. Control comes from information. And now, I had enough to start building something they would never see coming. Not a fight. A trap. The first mistake they made was thinking I would confront them. I didn't. Because once you understand the game, you don't flip the table. You learn the rules. Better than the people who built it. The next morning, everything looked normal. That's what made it dangerous. Same kitchen. Same light. Same perfect silence. Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, relaxed. Because, as far as he knew, nothing had changed. You okay? He asked casually. I smiled. Of course. That answer did something subtle. It relaxed him. And that told me everything. He didn't want truth. He wanted stability. So I gave him exactly that. While I started taking what I actually needed, information. That afternoon, I didn't go back to the bank. I went somewhere better. A law office. Not flashy. Not intimidating. Just quiet. The kind of place where people don't react. They analyze. Her name was Naomi Bennett. Mid-furious. Sharp eyes. Still posture. The kind of woman who didn't waste words. Because she didn't need to. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Because this wasn't about emotion. It was about structure. If assets are held under a parent's name, I asked, does that make them untouchable in a marriage? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at me. Not at my clothes. Not at my ring. At me. How long have you suspected something? She asked. Last night, I said. She smiled. Just slightly. That's not when it started, she said. She was right. I reached into my bag and slid the paper across the desk. Emily does not require visibility. Naomi read it once. No reaction. Then she looked up. Do you want to leave? She asked. Or, do you want to understand what you're dealing with? That question mattered, because it defined everything that came next. I want to understand everything, I said. No hesitation. No uncertainty. She nodded. And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Because women who want to leave get advice. Women who want to understand build cases. Naomi opened a folder. We don't start with ownership, she said. A pause. We start with control. That word again. Control. Who lives in the house? She asked. Me and Daniel. Who uses the cars? Us. Who benefits from the accounts? Daniel. She nodded once. Good, she said. That word felt different now. Why is that good? I asked. Because courts don't just look at names, she said. They look at reality. Reality. That was the one thing Daniel had been rewriting for years. And if reality doesn't match the paperwork? I asked. Naomi leaned back slightly. Then the paperwork becomes a liability, she said. Liability. Not protection. Weakness. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Leverage. Bring me everything you can find, she said. Tax returns. Statements. Property records. Emails. I nodded. And Emily, she added. Yes? Don't confront him yet. I almost smiled. I wasn't planning to weigh. She nodded. Good, she said. Because people only become careful when they know they're being watched. And Daniel. It wasn't careful yet. That night, I went back into his office. Not nervous. Not hesitant. Intentional. I moved slower this time. More precise. I didn't just look. I studied. I photographed everything. Dates. Names. Transfers. Patterns. Because patterns tell the truth. People try to hide. And then, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Behind the main folder. A second one. A second one. Older. Heavier. Hidden just enough to feel accidental. It wasn't. I pulled it out. Opened it carefully. Inside, legal documents. Not financial records. Not summaries. structures, trust agreements, authority clauses, oversight provisions, and one name, repeating again and again and again, Margaret Hawthorne. At first, it meant nothing, just another name, in a system full of names, but then I saw it. At the bottom of a page, small, precise, final authority subject to Clause 17 Hawthorne provision. I read it once, then again. Clause 17, Hawthorne provision. Something about it felt different. The other documents were about control, ownership, structure. This one felt like a condition, a limit, a failsafe. The next morning, I brought everything to Naomi. She didn't react immediately. She read, slowly, carefully, page by page. And then, she stopped. At the same line I had, Clause 17. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What is it? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me. Where did you get this? She asked. Daniel's office? She nodded, then said something that changed everything. This isn't just a family structure, she said. A pause. It's a controlled trust. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means, she said, someone else decides how power moves. Someone else. Margaret Hawthorne? I asked. Naomi nodded. And Clause 17? I pressed. She flipped back to the page. Read carefully. Then, very quietly, she smiled. Not warm. Strategic. Clause 17, she said, is a failsafe. My pulse slowed. For what? I asked. She met my eyes. For situations exactly like yours. Silence. What does it do? I asked. She closed the folder. That, she said, depends on whether your husband made one very specific mistake. Daniel. Mistake. Those two words had never existed together before. What mistake? I asked. Naomi stood up, walked to the window, then turned back. Control only works, she said, if the person controlling everything follows the rules of the structure. A pause. And based on what I'm seeing, she tapped the folder lightly. Daniel hasn't been following the rules. Everything slowed. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about leaving. It was about exposure. And if he broke those rules? I asked. Naomi held my gaze. Then everything your mother-in-law built. She paused. Can be taken out of her hands. The room went quiet. Not heavy. Clear. Because now, I understood something they didn't. Catherine thought she owned everything. Daniel thought he controlled everything. But neither of them realized. They were both operating inside a system that could remove them. And I had just found the switch. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because traps don't work when you celebrate too early. They work when the other person still believes they're in control. So I went home, walked into that perfect kitchen, that perfect house, that perfect illusion. And when Daniel looked at me, I smiled. Controlled. Exactly the way he always did. Because now, I wasn't asking questions anymore. I was waiting for the moment the system would turn and show them what they had built. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The first time my mother-in-law looked at me differently was the moment she realized I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting and waiting. Is something people in control I don't know how to handle. It started with an email. Not sent to me. Never sent to me. But Daniel made one mistake. He left his laptop open. That had never happened before. Not once. Daniel was careful with everything. His words, his image, his systems. So when I saw the screen still lit, I knew something had shifted. Not outside. Inside him. I didn't touch the keyboard. Didn't scroll. Didn't move anything. I just stood behind the chair and read. Subject line. Trust review mandatory attendance. Mandatory. That word didn't belong to Catherine's world. In her world, everything was optional, as long as she controlled it. This was different. Participants. Catherine Mercer. Daniel Mercer. Hawthorne Legal Group. And at the bottom, Margaret Hawthorne. There it was again. The name that had been hiding inside documents. Now stepping into reality. This wasn't theory anymore. This wasn't paperwork. This was activation. That night, Daniel was different. Not angry, not distant. Careful. Too careful. The way people behave when they're trying to look normal, but can't fully control the edges. Big day tomorrow? I asked casually. He paused. Just a fraction of a second. Just meetings. He said. Just meetings. That was his version of control. Minimize. Reduce. Contain. I nodded. Smiled. Of course. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because Catherine, who had just walked in, stopped. She turned slowly. Looked at me. Really looked. Not through me. Not past me. At me. Like she was trying to solve something. That didn't fit. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't asking. I wasn't adjusting. I was calm. And calm terrifies people who rely on control. The car left at exactly 8:40. Black sedan. Quiet. Precise. I watched it disappear through the front window. And then I moved. By 9:15. I was sitting in Naomi's office. I saw the email. I said. She didn't look surprised. Good. She replied. That word again. But now, it meant timing. Can I be there? I asked. She shook her head. No. I frowned slightly. Why not? Because you don't need to be in the room. She said. A pause. You need to control what happens inside it. I leaned forward. How? Naomi opened a folder. Not the one from before. A new one. Thinner. Sharper. Inside. A single document. The trust has a reporting requirement. She said. I felt something shift. What kind of requirement? I asked. She slid the page toward me. Any concern regarding misuse of structure? She read slowly. Can be formally submitted to Hawthorne Oversight Authority. Oversight. Authority. These weren't family words. These were system words. And Clause 17? I asked. Naomi met my eyes. This is how it activates. Everything became very clear. So if someone reports? They investigate. She nodded. And if they find violations? I continued. She didn't answer immediately, which meant the answer mattered. Then she said, they don't ask permission to fix it. Silence. Not heavy. Sharp. Because now, this wasn't leverage. This was authority. Daniel broke the rules. I said. Repeatedly. Naomi replied. And Catherine? Naomi didn't hesitate. She built the structure. She said. A pause. But she doesn't control it. That was the moment. Not loud. But final. Because for the first time, I wasn't outside their system. I was holding something that could rewrite it. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Emily, she said. Once you submit this, she tapped the page. There's no going back. No going back. I thought about that. The house. The life. The illusion. The years I spent trying to belong inside something that never included me. And then I thought about the line, Emily does not require visibility. I picked up the document, signed my name. No hesitation. No emotion. Just clarity. Because they had built a system designed to exclude me. They just never expected I would be the one to activate it. That afternoon, while Catherine and Daniel sat in that meeting, thinking they were in control, an email was sent. Not emotional, not dramatic, precise, to Hawthorne Legal. Subject line, Formal Concern Trust Misuse Review Request. And somewhere, in a room they didn't control, Margaret Hawthorne, it was reading it. That night, Daniel came home late. Too late. His tie loosened. His movements sharper. Something had happened. Rough meeting? I asked. He looked at me. Longer than usual? Something's changed, he said. I nodded slowly. I can feel it too. And for the first time, he didn't correct me. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure what he was controlling anymore. And Catherine? She didn't come back that night. Which meant whatever had started in that room was already bigger than both of them. And the last page? Still untouched. Still waiting. Because what they built was about to be tested by something they never planned for. A system that didn't belong to them. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't what they said. It was what they stopped saying. The next morning, the house felt different. Not colder. More precise. Like everything inside it was waiting for something no one wanted to name. Daniel was already in the kitchen when I walked in, but he wasn't doing anything. Not really. His phone was in his hand. Scrolling. Refreshing. Locking. Unlocking. Over and over again. That wasn't his pattern. Daniel didn't repeat actions. Without purpose. Which meant he was waiting. For what? I asked lightly. He didn't look up. Nothing, he said. Nothing. That word again. People don't check nothing every 30 seconds. I poured coffee slowly. Didn't rush. Didn't push. Because pressure only works when the other person reacts. And I wasn't reacting anymore. At Noah Chinchizet oped. His phone rang. He picked it up instantly. No hesitation. Yeah, he said. Pause. His expression changed. Not dramatically. But enough. Recognition. I understand, he said quietly. Another pause. Then, the line that mattered. No. Don't respond yet. Don't respond. That meant something had already started. He hung up, looked at me, and for a moment, he didn't know what I knew. What is it? I asked. He hesitated, which meant he was deciding how much to hide. Just internal review, he said. Internal review, 2 words that sound safe. Until you understand, they mean loss of control. I nodded slowly. From the trust? I asked. That was the moment. The moment everything shifted. Because Daniel froze. Just for half a second. But it was enough. How do you know about that? He asked. Not controlled. Not smooth. I smiled. I listen, I said. He stared at me. Longer than usual, trying to read something he had never needed to read before. Me. That's when fear starts. Not when you lose control, but when you lose visibility. The second call came at 11:40. This time, he didn't take it in front of me. He walked outside, closed the door, but I could still see him, through the glass. Pacing, hand in his hair. Talking faster than usual. That never happened. Daniel never rushed anything. 10 minutes later, the car pulled in. Catherine, but not like before. No slow entrance. No controlled pace. She moved quickly. Sharp. Focused. Daniel, she said immediately. No greeting. No acknowledgement. Just urgency. They went straight into his office. Door closed. I didn't follow. Didn't press my ear to the door. I didn't need to. Power under pressure always makes noise. At first, just voices. Low. Controlled. Then, edges. You told me this was contained, Catherine said. Contained. I didn't think, Daniel started. You didn't think? That was new. Catherine never interrupted. I told you to be careful. She continued. I was careful. Daniel snapped. Snapped. That had never happened before. Silence. Then, lower. More dangerous. What exactly do they have? Catherine asked. I leaned slightly closer. To the kitchen wall. Not obvious. Not desperate. Just enough. Documents? Daniel said. Pause. And a formal submission. Formal submission. That was me. Catherine didn't respond immediately, which meant she was calculating. Who filed it? She asked. I didn't breathe. I don't know. Daniel said. Lee. But not a confident one. Find out. She said. Simple. Then, the line that confirmed everything. If Hawthorne opens this fully. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Because both of them already knew what that meant. The door opened. I stepped back. Just enough. Catherine walked out first. And for the first time, she looked at me. Without control. Not completely. But enough. Suspicion. Emily. She said. I smiled. Yes? She held my gaze. Sharp. Has anything... Careful wording. Testing. I tilted my head slightly. Like what? I asked. She studied me. Searching. For a crack. A reaction. A mistake. She didn't find one. Nothing. She said. but her tone said, everything. That afternoon, the email started. Not to me. To Daniel. I didn't need to see them. I watched the effect. Subject lines I caught, reflected in his screen. Immediate documentation request. Clarification required trust activity. Review escalation notice. His breathing changed. Subtle, but real. He stopped eating. Stopped sitting. Started pacing. Started checking his phone. Every few minutes. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was movement. That night, he tried something new. Not control. Not deflection. Something closer to honesty. Emily, he said, standing in the kitchen. If something was happening, he paused. You would tell me, right? That question. Not manipulation. I looked at him. Steady. What do you think is happening? I asked. He didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And that was the most dangerous place a man like Daniel could be. Uninformed. I think, I said slowly, stepping closer, that sometimes I met his eyes. Systems correct themselves. His face changed. Not completely, but enough. Emily, he started. But I shook my head slightly. You said everything was under control. I said softly. A pause. Maybe now we'll see if that's true. I walked past him, left him standing there, because for the first time, he wasn't controlling the situation. He was inside it. And somewhere, in a room he couldn't access, Margaret Hawthorne was still reading, still reviewing, still deciding what to do with everything they built. And this time, they wouldn't get to decide the outcome, because the system they trusted was no longer protecting them. It was correcting them, and I had been the one who started it. The moment everything became real was when the woman behind the system finally stepped into the room. Her name was Margaret Hawthorne, and unlike Catherine, she didn't need control. She was the reason it existed. The email came at 7:12 a.m. Daniel saw it first. I didn't need to look. I felt it. The shift. The kind that happens when something irreversible has already been decided. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the screen. Longer than normal. That told me everything. This wasn't something he could minimize. His phone buzzed again. This time, he read it out loud. Mandatory appearance, he said quietly. Pause. Both of us. That word landed differently, because until now, everything had been happening around me. Behind doors, inside systems, between names I wasn't supposed to know. Now I was being pulled into it. Who sent it? I asked. He hesitated. Just enough. Margaret Hawthorne, he said. And just like that, the invisible part of their world became real. The meeting was set for noon. Location. Not their office. Not Catherine's space. A private legal conference building in Manhattan. Neutral. Controlled. The kind of place where status doesn't transfer. Which meant Catherine couldn't dominate the room. Before she entered it, she arrived early. Of course she did. But this time, she wasn't composed. She was precise. Every movement measured. Every breath controlled. Because, for the first time, she wasn't the highest authority. In the room, the drive there was silent. No music. No conversation. Just tension, tight enough to feel. In the space between words, Daniel stared straight ahead. Catherine didn't look at either of us. And me? I watched. Because observation is power. When everything else is shifting. When we arrived, everything felt different. No luxury signals. No visual status. No Chanel jackets, trying to establish hierarchy. No Rolex watches, measuring influence. Just quiet authority. The kind that doesn't need proof. We were escorted upstairs immediately. No waiting. No delay. Which meant they were already ready for us. The conference room was simple. Glass walls. Dark table. Minimal design. Nothing decorative. Because nothing here was meant to impress. Only to decide. And, at the far end, she was already sitting there. Margaret Hawthorne. No introduction. No announcement. She looked up once. And in that single glance, the entire room recalibrated. Because power like hers doesn't arrive. It exists. Mrs. Mercer, she said calmly. Not Catherine. Mrs. Mercer. A title, not a name. That was deliberate, because titles create distance, and distance removes control. Catherine sat down slowly. Daniel followed. I sat last. Margaret didn't smile, didn't greet, didn't perform. She opened a file. Let's begin, she said. New context. No framing. Just facts. Over the past 5 years, she said, there have been repeated inconsistencies between reported structure, she turned a page, and actual usage. Daniel shifted slightly. Catherine didn't move. Properties titled under Catherine Mercer. Occupied and controlled by Daniel Mercer. Silence. Accounts categorized as independent holdings. Funding personal expenditures. Undisclosed residential property in Manhattan. That one hit. Daniel looked down. Catherine's hand tightened. Just slightly. Margaret didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. Because truth, when presented cleanly, doesn't require emphasis. This constitutes misuse of structure, she said. Not accusation. Conclusion. Daniel finally spoke. This is being misunderstood. Margaret raised her hand. He stopped. Immediately. That was the moment. The hierarchy became visible. Catherine controlled Daniel. Margaret controlled consequence. You were given flexibility, she said calmly. A pause. You chose to treat it as invisibility. Daniel didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. Margaret turned to Catherine. And you, she said, approved this structure. Not a question. Catherine met her gaze. We operated within reasonable interpretation, she said. Careful. Measured. Margaret held her eyes. No, she said. A pause. You operated within convenience. Silence. And just like that, Catherine Mercer lost control of the room. Then, Margaret turned to me. For the first time, Emily, she said. No title. No distance. Just, Emily, you submitted the concern. I nodded. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. Because clarity is the only language power respects. She studied me, then nodded once. Good, she said. But this time, it meant validation. Margaret closed the file. Based on current findings, she said. We are initiating full review authority. Daniel inhaled sharply. Full review. That wasn't escalation. That was takeover. And pending outcome? She continued. Control of key assets will be temporarily restricted. Restricted. That word changed everything, because control was the foundation of everything they had built. And now, it was being removed, without permission, without negotiation. The meeting ended quickly. No arguments, no debate, because this wasn't a discussion. It was execution. In the elevator, Daniel finally turned to me. What did you do? He asked. Not anger. Desperation. I met his eyes. I followed the rules, I said. That answer hit harder than anything else. Because for the first time, the system wasn't protecting him. It was protecting me. When we got home, everything felt different. Not physically. Structurally. Because now, they weren't in control. They were being evaluated, measured, reduced. And somewhere, inside a system, they couldn't access. Final decision was already being built. And the last page? Still untouched. Still waiting. Because what Margaret had taken was control. What I was about to take was something they never understood. Choice. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The room didn't go silent. When the evidence was presented, it went silent. When they realized there was no version of the story left that could save them. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. Not a courtroom. Worse, a private review board, which meant no audience, no performance, no narrative to control, just truth, in its cleanest form. Daniel arrived first. Of course he did, but not like before. No composure, no polish, just tension, trying to look like control. His suit was perfect, but the way he adjusted his cuff, twice, gave him away. Because control never repeats itself. Catherine arrived 5 minutes later. Still elegant. Still precise. But now, I could see it clearly. Before, she shaped the room. Now she was reacting to it. I sat across from them. Not because I was stronger, but because I had already accepted what they were about to face. Acceptance is the quietest form of power. At exactly 10, the door opened. Margaret walked in. No announcement. No pause. And behind her, 2 auditors. That detail mattered. Because auditors don't attend conversations. They attend conclusions. Let's proceed, Margaret said. No greeting. Just movement. The first file opened. Summary of findings. She said. Page 1. Repeated misrepresentation of ownership structures. Page 2. Undisclosed asset usage. Inconsistent with declared reporting. Page 3. Diversion of functional control through intermediary entities. The words were technical, but the meaning was simple. You hid what you were doing. And now, we can prove it. Daniel didn't look up. Catherine didn't move. But the air tightened. Then came the documents. Not complicated ones. Not dense legal language. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Dates. Transfers. Usage logs. Patterns that didn't match. Their story. Patterns that couldn't be explained away. Margaret didn't interpret them. She didn't need to. Because truth, when structured correctly, removes interpretation. Mr. Jector. Mercer, she said. Daniel looked up slowly. Yes. Did you benefit from assets you claimed were not under your control? A pause. A real one. Because this wasn't a question. He could redirect. Yes, he said. No defense. No framing. Just confirmation. Margaret nodded once, then turned to Catherine. Mrs. Mercer, she said. Did you knowingly maintain structures that obscured practical ownership? Catherine held her gaze. For a moment, I saw it. The instinct. To control. To reframe. To dominate. But none of those tools worked here. Because control requires leverage. And she had already lost it. Yes, she said. And just like that, everything they built collapsed into a single word. Yes. No strategy. No recovery. Just truth. The auditors exchanged a glance. Not surprised. Confirmed. Margaret closed the file. And then, she asked the question. The one that ended everything. If the structure was legitimate, she said calmly, why was there a need to keep it hidden from the only person with a legal claim inside it? Silence. Not uncomfortable. Absolute. Because that question didn't challenge their system. It exposed their intent. Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it. Catherine didn't move. Because there was no answer that didn't destroy them. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not failure. Exposure. The thing they had avoided for years. Finally happening. In real time. Margaret didn't wait. She didn't need to. Control of all reviewed structures, she said, is hereby suspended, pending reassignment. Suspended. That word hit harder than any accusation. Because suspension means loss. Immediate. Irreversible. Effective immediately. She continued. Operational authority will be transferred to neutral oversight. Daniel inhaled sharply. Catherine's hand tightened. On the table, for the first time, she looked human. Not powerful. Not untouchable. Just exposed. Then, Margaret turned to me. Emily, she said. I met her eyes. Yes. Do you wish to remain involved in the structure going forward? That question shifted everything. Because for the first time, the system wasn't asking them what they wanted. It was asking me. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Daniel, the man who told me I didn't need visibility. I looked at Catherine, the woman who told me this wasn't my house. And then I answered, no. Silence. Not hesitation. Clarity. I don't want control. I said calmly. A pause. I want separation. That word landed. Because separation means loss, not shared. Not negotiated. Final. Margaret nodded once. Understood, she said. No emotion. Just decision. The meeting ended there. No recovery. No second chance. Because once truth is recorded, it doesn't reverse. Outside, Daniel didn't speak. Catherine didn't look at me. They walked in silence. Not together. Just forward. Like people leaving a place they no longer belong to. I stayed behind for a moment. Just long enough to feel it. Not victory. Not revenge. Just balance. Because for the first time, everything was exactly what it had always been. Clear. And the last page? Still waiting. Because what Margaret took from them was control. What I was about to do was something they never understood. Freedom. The most powerful part of the story was never the investigation. It wasn't the hearing. It wasn't even the moment they lost everything. It was the part they never thought to read. The last page. 3 days after the hearing, I got the call. Not from Daniel. Not from Catherine. From Margaret Hawthorne. Emily, she said. We need you to come in. Her tone hadn't changed. Still calm. Still precise. But this time, it carried something else. Finality. The building felt the same. Minimal. Quiet. Controlled. But the energy was different. Because this time, nothing was pending. Everything had already been decided. Margaret didn't waste time. She placed a folder in front of me. Clean. Deliberate. Before we finalize restructuring, she said, there's one provision you should fully understand. Provision. My fingers rested on the edge of the folder. For a moment, I didn't open it, because something inside me already knew. This was the part they never saw coming. Then, I opened it. Clause 17. The Hawthorne provision. The page they never showed me. The page they assumed would never matter. I started reading. In the event of structural misuse, concealed, or misrepresentation. The words felt different now. Not abstract. Precisi. Directed. Primary discretionary authority may be reassigned to the affected party. Asterisk. I paused. Affected party. I read that line again. Slower. Affected party. That wasn't Catherine. That wasn't Daniel. That was me. Upon validation by oversight. Silence. Not confusion. Clarity. Because for the first time, I understood the system better than the people who built their lives around it. I looked up. Margaret was watching me, not evaluating, confirming. They built the structure, she said. A pause. But the protection inside it, she tapped the page once, was never designed for them. Everything aligned. Catherine didn't own the system. She inherited access to it. Daniel didn't control the system. He benefited from it, but neither of them. Read it carefully, because people who believe they're in control don't look for limits. What happens now? I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. You have the option, she said, to assume controlling interest in all reassigned structures. Control everything Catherine protected, everything Daniel used. Now offered to me, no fight, no court, no negotiation, just transfer. For a moment, I imagined it. The house in Westchester, the accounts, the network, the life they built, on top of my silence, completely. I could take it, and they wouldn't be able to stop me. And that was the moment that mattered most. Not when they lost control, when I was offered it, because that's when you find out what power actually means. I closed the folder. No, I said. Margaret didn't react. I don't want it. I continued. A pause. I want it dismantled. The room stilled, not shocked, interested, because control is expected. Revenge is predictable. But refusal? That changes the system. You understand what you're declining, she said. Yes, I understand exactly. Silence. Then, for the first time, Margaret smiled. Just slightly. Good, she said. A week later, everything changed. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly, which made it permanent. The Westchester house, the accounts, reallocated, the layered structures, Dissolved. Clean. Final. Daniel. Placed on indefinite leave. Not fired. Worse. Uncertain. Because uncertainty lasts longer than loss. Catherine stepped down from multiple boards. Official reason. Personal matters. Of course. Because people like her don't fall. They withdraw. And me? I left. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just decided. 3 months later, I bought a place of my own. Not large. Not designed to impress. But real. Every document. My name. Every account. My access. Every key. My choice. One Saturday morning, I stood in my new kitchen. Sunlight across the counter. Coffee in my hand. No marble. No performance. Just quiet. Real quiet. And, for the first time, I understood something I should have known years ago. Control isn't power. Ownership isn't power. Silence isn't power. Choice is. That afternoon, I got one last message from Daniel. We could have fixed this. I stared at it. For a moment, I almost remembered who I used to be. The version of me who would have believed that. Then, I typed one sentence. You could have told me the truth. He didn't reply. He never would. Because the truth was the one thing he never learned to control. And the last page? The one they ignored. The one they underestimated. The one that changed everything. It was never about taking power. It was about revealing who never had it.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real persons or events is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI-assisted production.